Today, I talk about the last 25 years of internet media with Kirby Winfield, who is a founding member or CEO of 4 distinct internet media businesses from the late 90s to today. Kirby's currently the GP of Ascend.vc, which is a seed fund investing in companies here in the Pacific Northwest. And we talk about the go-go 90s. We talk about when the industry starts to look inward at things like ad visibility and measurement. And we talk through to today about how Kirby makes decisions on investing in founders. In this conversation, especially towards the end, I try to set up Kirby to toot his own horn about his accomplishments. He does not really take the bait, and so what you get are some very thoughtful and at times self-deprecating answers. Enjoy. Kirby, how are you?
Hey, John, I'm doing great. How are you?
Good. Good to see you. You and I met many moons ago. When that happened, you were running marketing for a public company called GoToNet, shout out, which had gone public during the .com boom. Talk a little bit about that time and what your biggest learning was early in your career.
I mean, I did nothing but learn, I feel like, for those 4 or 5 years. I just remember waking up one day and realizing I was the head of marketing at a public company. And I think I was 23. It didn't make any sense. My qualifications were basically I had an English major. I did an advertising internship, and I did some copywriting for one of the founders of the company before they founded the company as a summer gig. And that led me into, apparently that meant I could run marketing for a $4 billion company. So like the learnings were early and often for me. But if I had to pull one out, I think it would be team matters more than anything. I mean, I've had the privilege of working with, the founders of GoToNet on another company called Marchex after that, as you well recall. So we shared a desk there. Literally a desk where we stared at each other all day because the company was very frugal and we only had one desk. So worked there, and then was fortunate enough to run a couple companies myself. And I think at the time we were doing GoToNet and I was running marketing, I just took for granted that you would always get to work with people you really, really liked and really, really respected, who either gave you the time and the leeway to, make your own way and create your own path and kind of do the hard learning that you needed to do from a tactical perspective, whether it was my marketing job and having my boss, who was the COO, sort of take the time to redline my copy, or take the time to print off my deck and tear it down for me, and do that again and again when, he had a lot of pressing business to attend to. So just people who took care of each other and thought about each other's, growth, and people who liked being around each other. We worked, 14, 16 hours a day, no lie, right? For like 7 days a week for 5 years. I remember thinking I was so critical to the mission of the company. In retrospect, it's silly because, as we know, the graveyard is full of irreplaceable people, right? But at the time, I thought it was so important that I didn't visit my family. I didn't, go to weddings. I really didn't do anything but work for a long time. And as it turns out, you can do that if you really, really like and respect the people that you're working with. So I think that was the biggest takeaway. When people always say team's important, but really having that infused in your blood early on in a career is a real gift.
Well, you hit on so many good topics there. I mean, one, having a mentor or someone that was invested in your success, that's big. Second, I think hustle is really important, especially when you're trying to figure out everything on the fly. Just putting in those extra hours enabled you probably to overcome like mistakes that might happen or whatever. Writing, I mean, you kind of poo-pooed your English major, but in marketing, and particularly when you're trying to work with senior leaders, being able to communicate is so incredibly important. But then I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about the role of experimentation, because it sounded like at GoToNet, you were given the reins to figure things out, and you probably made a bunch of errors, and the ability that you felt like you weren't going to get, I don't know, in trouble or whatever for making those errors was probably fairly important.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely got in trouble. I, you and I both recall working for a CEO who had very high standards there, and I'll never forget. We had, GoToNet was a sort of tough name to get reporters to spell correctly, especially because we decided that it should be capitalized in an odd fashion. I'll never forget having to say 1,000 times capital G, lowercase o, the numeral 2, capital N, lowercase e, lowercase t. I'll never forget, like that slides off the tongue, doesn't it? And when that would be spelled wrong in the Wall Street Journal, I certainly heard about it. But yeah, I think that's right. I think, again, being relatively inexperienced and being given the keys to a $10 million ad agency review, and really not having our senior leadership, or my mentor and boss, who was the COO, John Keister, he didn't even sit in on the first meeting. Like, he literally just let me go and interview a bunch of ad agencies, and I figured out how to do that. Through a course of kind of a comedy of errors, we ended up with a great firm, and pulled off an ad campaign that actually got featured in Adweek magazine, and that was sort of a highlight for me, because as a college kid, I always thought I'd be in advertising in an old school way, and but yeah, we to get to that point, in that one example, I had to fail at hiring a lot of different ad agencies, and then with the ad agency we went with, I had to fail at 7 different creative concepts. Then I had to fail at pitching those to our management, and then eventually we succeeded in pulling something off that I think helped define a brand that, at least in that window of time, was part of something pretty special, the advent of sort of internet media and digital publishing.
It's funny thinking back then about how when something was in print, you'd put it up on the wall in the office.
Oh yeah, that was validation. I mean, I remember my father-in-law always asked, "What the hell do you do?" And I'd be like, "Well, it's like a magazine, but it's on the computer." And and I think he only finally understood that when I was able to send him a copy of Adweek with our physical ad in it. But it's funny how that's changed.
I remember getting something in print in Barron's, and that was like such a big deal. It was on the back page, and Barron's was like this big, like oversized newspaper thing, offshoot of the Wall Street Journal. People probably know that for its online. I don't even know if it's in print anymore. But I wonder if how connected, thinking back then, how well do you feel like you knew GoToNet's mission, and like, did that help you make the right decisions when it came to selecting the ad agency?
Oh boy, that's a great question. I don't think we had any idea what our mission was. Our mission was to crush it. I mean, we had a very sort of competitive, sports-driven type culture, where the founders were both college athletes. I think probably the first 10 employees were all college athletes, and we sort of we were playing the game to win, and it was very much sort of a Wall Street type culture, more so than a Silicon Valley tech culture. So I think the concept of culture was relatively anathema to most of us, and it sort of just grew up out of the early team. And in terms of mission, no, I mean, I think it was so. I think the challenge for a lot of companies that were founded in 95, 96 like ours was that you were literally growing up with the medium as it grew. And so it was very difficult to decide what we're going to be, we're going to do X for the internet, or we're going to do X for like a category, because the internet the first ad had just been sold like 9 months before we started GoToNet. I mean, we were hard coding, Kevin Bauer was like in Adobe, Acrobat or whatever, like coding up, like drawing ads that we would then like physically put on a web page that I had to like cut and paste HTML on and publish every night at midnight. And like, so I think the idea of like company building or, creating, I think we all felt like our mission was to create the internet. I mean, that's probably like the right answer, is that we felt like we were changing the world. We felt like, you remember, I mean, we would be in the office at, 8 p.m. on a Saturday, listen, like with the coders playing techno and like, drinking your 10th Mountain Dew of the day and just feeling like you were part of something that nobody understood, because they didn't. I mean, everyone I knew from school, was either getting their MBA or working on Wall Street or, working in industry, family members, it, almost everyone who wasn't a part of the early internet thought the early internet was a fad. They thought it was a joke. They thought it was a lark. And and so I think the mission was to prove them wrong and to say, this is actually a real bit, you can build real businesses on, what has been historically like a public good, for, some small group of geeks to communicate. And being a part of, the advent of search, being a part of the advent of e-commerce, even with the business that you brought to the table, being a part of sort of the advent of fintech in a way, right? And certainly with authorized net and payments, the advent of web hosting. We own the two largest web hosting businesses in the world, and I think it's easy to forget that you could make such an outsized impact in such a short amount of time because the actual medium was growing so quickly. And I don't know if we'll see that again in our lifetimes. We saw it a little bit with mobile, but the tracks were already laid, with the early internet business models. And so yeah, no, I think the mission was just to create something new.
Yeah, I do feel like that's the mission after you sort of talked out those early times. And I know you invest in early stage companies now. We'll get to that a little bit later, but when it comes to some of the things that some people may consider fads, whether it's crypto or NFTs or Web3 or anything like that, there's a segment of folks who don't think things will change or this will take off. And then there are a set of folks who are building companies who are very passionate about it. Even if they don't know where the end point is, they have a unique perspective on it. And that's probably some of what you're looking for when you invest in a company. I'll get to that in a little bit, but I want to, before we get to your current gig, I want to talk a little bit more about how your career evolved. So after GoToNet, you stayed in advertising and you were the CEO of a company that focused on ad visibility and measurement. It used to be kind of a novel concept that you should be able to actually physically see an advertisement before you are charged for it. Talk about a little bit about the challenges that the digital marketing industry faced during that time in your career, and then how do you think it's evolved or is different today?
Yeah, I mean, I think the analogy I used to try to make to the folks we were pitching on this ad visibility measurement product was, you know, if you're a brand and you're watching the Super Bowl and it's commercial break, and instead of your commercial showing up, it was just dead air for 30 seconds, would you pay for that? And the answer is, of course not. And yet, provably, certainly, and I don't know what the numbers are now. I don't think they've changed that much actually, but certainly in 2010 or 11, provably, if you were buying on networks and programmatically, something like 40% of your ads were just not being, they were never in a position to be possibly seen by a human, whether because of fraud or because of, placements below the fold or, what have you. And so, the challenge I think in digital marketing, and digital media that's somewhat unique to digital media, and so that's why it's been so intractable, is because it's really not possible to be a problem in print and outdoor and over the top. In linear TV, is that there's a huge misalignment of incentives. So, if you publish the Seattle Times, you're incentivized to create great content that engages readers so that you can sell advertisements that are relevant to those readers. And it's pretty straightforward. But in digital media, there are so many stops along the way from an ad, where an ad is purchased to where an ad is delivered, that some vast majority of the time, like, the publisher doesn't know who bought the ad, why they bought the ad. Was it bought based on data? Was it bought based on category targeting? Was it bought based on keyword targeting? Was it bought by a reputable holding company ad agency? Was it bought by a third-party ad network? Was it bought by a demand-side platform? Was it bought by a bad actor who's trying to infuse spyware or malware onto consumers' desktops? And every stop along the way, from the advertiser to the publisher, all of those stops are populated by people who are incentivized to extract value, not to create value for the consumer or for the brand or for the publisher. And I think that's what makes it really hard to get digital media, quote unquote, right. And so what you get instead is inefficiency priced in, or fraud priced in. And we found that. I think we sold our company to Comscore, which is a big, one of the two largest digital measurement firms in the world, and a number of our competitors ended up, staying independent, and either going public or getting bought by private equity firms. And I wake up with night sweats about the fact that we could have been a $5 billion public company by now, like Double Verify. But the thing is, I don't think much has changed. I think these companies just provide cover for everyone in the industry to continue to conduct business as usual, because it's just too hard. It's A, too hard to police the problems, and it's B, not worth it. Right? Because I remember someone at a conference, said once, like, they called it optimizing for the edge. And kind of that's what you're doing when you start dealing with like large programmatic buying, is you're optimizing for the edge. And so if 80% of the value comes from 20% of your spend, which is usually the case, then is it really worth you spending, tons of time and money trying to figure out how to eke out another, 5 basis points of yield on your programmatic ad buying? I mean, look, 90% of all ads are programmatic now, so I'm kind of showing my age by even using the word. But I think the principle still holds true. And so, there's a lot of theater that goes on in the digital media world around doing the right thing. But I'm not sure it matters.
Yeah, in the performance space, which is where I operate right now, the insistence is so much on measuring the results of something, whether it's a display by a DR ad, paid TV, or anything. And it's ultimately up to the publisher to prove to you, I think, that something is working rather than, like you say, try to squeeze every little thing about optimizing X, Y, and Z on the publisher. Control what you can control, which is the experience when someone gets to your site or your experience, and then understand where the ads actually are, and you get most of what you need done. You can focus on what you can control. You've worked a lot in marketplaces. I mean, GoToNet, as you were describing it, was kind of an early marketplace. You were an enabler of making marketplaces more successful at the ad visibility companies. Sorry, the name escaped me, although you just said it. And then you pivoted to B2C, where you were the CEO of Dwellable, which was a mobile first company, had a search engine for vacation rentals. So you've worked in marketplaces much of your career. What are the recipes for success in growing a marketplace in your mind?
I mean, there are a lot of smart people who've written a lot about marketplaces. Boris Wertz at Version 1 Ventures publishes an annual report on marketplace startups. And Andreessen and Benchmark are firms that have invested hugely successfully in marketplaces and have, so I can't hold myself out to have all the answers. If I did, I'd probably still be running a gigantic public company that was a marketplace instead of having had to sell them. But look, I mean, I think you need to solve the cold start problem. You need to create a flywheel, and you need So let me shoot that in the head and start over. Okay, so to build a successful marketplace company, there are a bunch of ingredients that you need, and others have opined and spoken more eloquently on that than I can. But I think to me the core problem to solve is the cold start problem, and that's simply you need enough supply to serve the demand, but you need enough demand to make the suppliers happy, and inevitably you need to garner an inordinate amount of one of those things before you can get the other. And typically in marketplaces, you need to get the suppliers on first, because they're so eager to get demand that if you can hold out promise of a new demand channel, you can probably get started. And when I look at marketplaces, I always just grant them that they're going to have demand. I mean, that they're going to have supply. Like, that's the easy part. If you can't get suppliers on your marketplace, then you have to quit and do something else. Once you have the suppliers, getting them, the demand is very tricky, depending on what space you're in. So it wasn't tricky 15 years ago, right? Because you could still buy search engine advertising at a relatively a rate that was not onerous. But now, if you, for instance, in the travel business, you're competing against $12 billion in annual spend from Booking.com and Expedia. No matter what no matter what niche that you think you're in, you can't compete with those folks on SEM. It's really hard to compete on SEO. It takes forever. So what's your demand plan? And that's where the concept of sort of bring your own demand comes in. So I love SaaS enabled marketplaces where you say, we're investors in one called Rock Paper Coin. It was founded by two women who had a very successful wedding planning business, and they realized there was no software that was purpose built for them to work with their own marketplace, which is vendors on one side, florists and caterers, event spaces, and brides to be on the other side. And so they built software to serve that market, with the concept being that because they would be able to have because they were necessary to both. They were already, as a bridal planning service, you're necessary to the supply and the demand. And because of that, you can dictate to the demand what software they use. And so they took bridal planners as their go-to-market supply side partners, and they gave them a SaaS product that they actually pay for. And then those planners force the brides and the vendors to use their software to consummate the transactions. And they take a fintech, they take basis points off that. What do you call it? Interchange fee on that. And that's a great example of solving that cold start and solving that sort of flywheel problem with SaaS enablement. But you can also do it. You think about marketplaces like Airbnb, where a lot of times the person who's renting their place out is also going to be a traveler, and I think that's how Airbnb initially spread. Or you start with a high purchase value that gives you the margin to play with to acquire customers. So Uber started with black cars, and had the cushion to be able to go. Well, they just raised a ton of money. That's the other solution. But yeah, so I don't know. I think marketplaces are best left to people other than me as operators and founders, for sure. But you kind of know one when you see one that you think might work, and because it's got a novel approach to solving that cold start and then getting a flywheel running.
So you mentioned the company that you invested in, and now let's talk about your your current gig. You're the GP of Ascend.vc. You've got the logo. For those of you watching on YouTube, you've got the hat with the logo. So you invest in PNW, Pacific Northwest startups. Why did this become
hot fire startups in the rainy Pacific Northwest?
Yeah,
people always ask me, what is that about? Like,
why is there an umbrella and a fire? Shouldn't the rain be putting out the fire?
It's good. The rain's going to put out the fire in about 5 days here.
So why did this become a passion of yours? Why did you want to start the fund? And then what's great and unique about investing in the Northwest? Everyone talks about Silicon Valley. You don't do that. You do Pacific Northwest. What's unique about investing where you and I live?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, so I did 20 years of startups as a, either founding team member or founder and CEO. And in those 20 years, we, were fortunate enough to get 4 exits. I mean, but each one of them was more difficult, and each one of them was actually less financially successful. And I sort of realized, like, I was just cooked. I didn't have it in me to do another one as an operator. I don't think I'm actually really cut out for 0 to 1 startups as an operator. I mean, if you think about it, the first 2 startups I did were actually financially engineered by some really smart people, to where we kind of started the game with Series A money in the bank, like at the idea stage, and then we leveraged public markets to roll up a bunch of properties using equity. So if I'm honest, like, how much did I have to do with the success of those companies? I mean, I think I helped, but they couldn't have happened without, Russ and John being and Pete Christodoulou being just really, really smart financial engineers. And then when I got to doing the startups that were actually real startups, I found that being sort of more operator focused, more scale focused, maybe a little bit more cynical, things that are rewarded in a public company. And the first 2, we got public very quickly. If you recall, like, we were private for like 9 months, and both of them IPO'd through like a small business backdoor, which was like a SPAC before a SPAC existed. And so, again, just kind of having to realize, like, oh shoot, no, you have to validate with customers, and you have to pitch real venture funds, and you have to figure out how to play that game, and then you have to execute. It was just, I felt like I took my shots, and you know, I didn't see a big future for me on that side of the table. But what I had come to realize was that, you know, I just had some really unique experience. You know, I think some of us are pretty good at sort of downplaying to ourselves the the things we've experienced, and the roles we've had, and the successes that have, you know, arisen around us, or even, you know, other people might classify as success what we classify as failure. And so I kind of, you know, was able to step back and see I had some valuable experience, and I thought I could apply that as an investor. And and so I started angel investing full time in 2016, and 2019 raised the first fund. And I think, and we're on fund 2 now. I think, you know, one of the things that made it pretty straightforward to raise the fund is that Seattle is, to a great extent, and to a somewhat lesser extent, but still relevantly, the Pacific Northwest writ large, we're just at an inflection point. And having grown up here my whole life, and especially having operated in the technology industry here my whole life, we're at an inflection point that I think New York probably saw in 2008, and I think that the Valley saw in, you know, maybe 1990. And that's where you finally have the depth and breadth of successful startups, startup outcomes, and talent from a startup value creation perspective to, you know, make the next 10 to 20 years in this region just phenomenally successful for folks who are investing and operating here. And I'll kind of dig into that. You know, I always make the analogy, and it's probably a little bit harsh, but, you know, for decades we had the 2 largest tech companies in the world here, right? And we had some of the highest density of, you know, technology talent in the world here. But the problem was there was no off-ramp from those giant companies for entrepreneurs. And so while you had your sporadic, you know, outcomes and value creation, I feel like half of which were created by, you know, Rich Barton and crew, whether it was Expedia or Zillow, and a number of, you know, their sort of coaching tree, if you will, have created a bunch of the other startups in town. But outside of those sporadic value creation events, most of the time these entrepreneurs, so the analogy I was referring to is these entrepreneurs would kind of jump off the top story of, you know, the Microsoft building or the Amazon building. And rather than being able to slide down on a nice, easy grade of pre-IPO startups and Series D startups and Series B startups and kind of learn how to do startups, these entrepreneurs are all, by the way, technical entrepreneurs, are just hitting the ground and breaking their legs. And occasionally they bounce twice and live and they create something, but the hit rate was pretty low. And I think a lot of that was due to not only not having an off-ramp, but also not having homegrown business talent that knew how to scale venture companies. Okay. We've had, you know, maybe 2 venture capital firms that have survived since the 90s. There's just not a homegrown venture ecosystem here. And so you just had to have, I mean, I remember, you know, even 2015, there were no unicorns in the Pacific Northwest. I remember, you know, trying to help people hire marketers. You know this. You if you needed to hire a growth marketer for like a, you know, Series B or beyond company in Seattle in 2012, you were going to have to move them from New York or San Francisco. And the same could be said for, you know, a lot of business functions. And I think now with, you know, Tableau going out for what, $17 billion in Salesforce, you know, DocuSign having a $32 billion outcome, Auth0 having a $6 billion outcome, and the insurance guys across the lake had a $3 billion outcome. You know, ZipWhip's $1 billion. You have these things are happening every year now, and so not only does that raise the profile of the ecosystem from a capital perspective, where now, you know, people always ask, why aren't there more venture firms in Seattle? I go, because they're all in SF. It's an hour flight They come up here now. Trust me. They're asking to throw parties. They want to meet founders. Like, they're here. Madrona is not actually leading every Series A round or seed round in Seattle. Voyager's not either. God bless them, and we love working with them. But they're a very small percentage of the capital in this ecosystem. I mean, what do we have? I think year to date, $6 billion deployed, and and the total AUM of funds in Seattle is like $2 billion, and that's AUM. So deployed in a given year is like 300 million. And Fuse is emerging as a great Series A fund. And again, I'm not knocking local funds, but the fact of the matter is that you need Silicon Valley money to scale an ecosystem. And Silicon Valley money was shy here a decade ago because they saw what I think we were kind of blind to, which is that there just wasn't a great place to build a company. And now it is. You've got folks like the Convoy team. You've got the OfferUp team. You've got the Amperity team. You've got Outreach. And these are companies that now have been around and raised enough money and got enough business to be at a place where they spin out their own entrepreneurs. You have people who are like, I came in at Series A and ran ops at Convoy. I'm going to do a startup now because they're at Series D. This is too late for me. I'm going to buy my options and go try my own thing. And that's happening, dozens of times a month at 35 companies in the region. And so it's just an incredibly exciting time to invest here. I don't know that it's happening like that. I guarantee you it's not happening like that in Miami. I don't know that it's happening like that in Austin. These other towns that you hear about, I think, there's validity to the concept that talent is more distributed than ever. Certainly we have teams that are remote. We're increasingly seeing opportunities out of market that are interesting that may have a light tie to Seattle. But, you still need, I think, that density of geolocal talent and success. Like, there's something really real about that. And that's what, that's what happened in New York, again, largely on the back of advertising technology, as it turns out, but, and health. And now increasingly New York is just, has blossomed into the place where you can start any kind of technology company and raise money. And I think Seattle deserves to be there. And I think we're on the cusp of having that kind of a 10-year, 20-year run.
So 2 questions about the raising money part of it to close out here. Here's the first one. So what do you think about marketing in an early stage, and like what do you look for as an investor from the revenue, from kind of the marketing and revenue engine to really help you seal the deal to say I want to cut a check here?
I'm kind of the wrong guy to ask because we invest at the idea stage. And so, typically there's not a marketing budget until after the next round of capital comes into a company. And so, I think if I'm looking for sort of anything on the marketing side, it's sort of very early go to market.
Well, let me pivot my question then a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
So I asked a guest, Brendan Dell, a few weeks back about the importance of a pitch deck, because in a way you're marketing yourself. And so in the initial meet and greet or idea stage, what kind of seeds of marketing thoughtfulness do you feel like is important for a startup? Because anybody can have an idea. How do you gain confidence that someone's going to be able to execute on it?
Yeah. If I knew that for sure, I'd bottle it and sell it. Right. I think so. I would say it's at this stage, it's even less about having confidence in their ability to execute. And it's more about, is what they're doing, is their insight about the world unique enough, and are they uniquely positioned to take advantage of that insight in such a way that then could possibly create a massive company? create a massive market if it doesn't exist? Is it, are they the right person? Is it the right time? And do they have an unfair advantage? And is their insight unique? I mean, those are the kinds of questions that I'm trying to get my head around. And I sort of have to grant that they'll figure out how to execute, grant that the product will be great, grant that the technology will work. Not that those things are easy, but those things can be done by talented people who aren't founders. Whereas like the idea and bringing it to life from whole cloth is just, that's the founders. That's what has to happen for the thing to be, wildly successful. And so it's funny, most founders miss this, and I missed it when I was raising money because I thought it was about, oh no, I'm going to put the widget in the wall, and then the thing comes out and money goes here, and then we build a business. That's actually not that's not the test that you're trying to pass. You fail if you pass that test. You actually fail, like the venture like pitch test. I mean, you don't fail it if you pass it, but like that's not the point. The point of the deck and the narrative and the story is to inspire the investor to believe that you're going to succeed in your mission. And so everything along the trail of that narrative, or every slide in the deck, needs to lead to that conclusion, and that the mission's worth taking, right? And so, you're judging. I always say it's like there are three things going on when you're pitching an investor. Like there's not actually one thing. They're evaluating your business opportunity, kind of. They're also evaluating you as a founder. What does that mean? I don't know. It's ineffable. You can't describe it. Are you inspiring? Like they're doing that in the back of their lizard brain. Like they're just trying to see, like, we just want to see a pattern. Is it a pattern that we know? Are we like, holy crap, the problem with any sort of pitch advice for founders is like, it's like, be special. Like how useful is that? Like the pitch advice, assuming you're special, then the pitch advice is do a really good job of landing 1 point per slide that leads people down a path that ends with them believing that you being special matters. Because if you're special, you're going to be special and everyone will know it. But like, you need to then do the work to get credit for being special, and being special in a way that then is going to create value. It's funny, I've never described it that way, but that's actually the job. And it's just so hard because most of us aren't special. I'm not special. And so I just tried to but if you're not special, but you're smart, because they're very different things. If you're not special, but you're smart, experienced, talented, and you work hard and you're networked, then you just build a pitch and you're like, well, come on, this is going to be great. Like we can make money on this. And that's just actually not the thing that, and a lot of people do. By the way, a lot of those companies get funded. I got funded, but those aren't the companies that are successful, like wildly successful.
The thing that I'm taking out from all of this is, how do you neatly and succinctly say that you're uniquely qualified to solve a problem? It's one thing to say a problem exists and I can execute against that problem. It's a whole other thing to say, I have this unique insider experience that I have that makes me better qualified to solve this problem than someone else, or maybe some type of unique advantage. And to me, that's the marketing nugget that I'm taking out of all of this. And let me ask you something to close this out, Kirby, which is at an early stage, you need a lot of help, and investors help by infusing money. They can potentially also help in other ways. It can also be a massive distraction. We've all heard about disasters of investors in the boardroom, and we've heard ways that investors can be hugely helpful. In your opinion, what should early stage companies expect out of investors? And then what advice would you give to early stage companies to keep investors either appropriately informed or leverage your investors for help when they need it?
Yeah, expect nothing but money from your investors. Expect the worst. I mean, almost, right? Like, depending on who they are, and you should interview them and check their references. But if they're reputable, you'll know. But especially with angel investors, they can destroy your company. You get one person who puts in 100K, and then if you have to take a pivot or recapitalize the company or raise a bridge, they treat it like it's Enron. And we've seen it happen. They just want to blow up the whole company, and they can do it. So I mean, sort of like that's caveat one. I don't. In terms of what can investors do for you, what should you expect from investors? I think there are different ways to approach that. And one way is to actually manage your investors like an outsourced strategy team or an outsourced, really good lead development team. But not all investors like being managed that way. So there's really no one size fits all sort of advice for getting value out of investors. I mean, I think if any, we've invested in 60 deals now as a firm. Not to toot my own horn, but we consistently hear that we're the most helpful investor on the cap table, and we're on cap tables with really big firms with really nice names. I think we have the advantage of only focusing on pre-seed, and so I kind of know more about that stage, and maybe I can be more helpful just because I focus on it. Well, I think a lot of great investors that we co-invest with are, they're investing in later stage companies and sort of more suited to later stage advice and solutions. So anyway, my takeaway is that, and I don't think I'm that helpful. So if I'm the most helpful, then, really investors aren't that helpful. You kind of, what some people will say is like, the goal is to invest in companies that don't need your help. That said, like the best way to keep investors posted on your progress and just keep them engaged is, honestly, it sounds simple, but do the standard monthly email. I have a template that I send our companies. Some of them use it, some of them don't. It's got emojis. Actually the emojis, I will say emojis serve a purpose. They break up the visual line of the update. People have a hard time reading word vomit and chart vomit and number vomit, and they don't understand how the story is progressing over time. So I would say, like, pick a KPI, whether if it's early, it might be customer engagement. If it's later, it might be revenue. But pick a KPI, be sure you're cool with reporting it every month, and then report it every month. If you need to change it. But, start with a TLDR that, is a one-liner on what your update's about. Start with a one-liner on what your company does, because all of your investors are busy people with lots of other investments. And so you need, and I will say this, John, you're a masterful marketer, so you'll appreciate this. Your investors are a pretty fancy audience if you're doing it right, and your advisors are too, and your potential investors, everyone who's getting this update, is a pretty fancy audience. And you have a newsletter that goes out monthly to them, and you have a chance to brand yourself to them. And so you sure as heck want to, land the point of like who you are, what you do, who you do it for, and think about it like life cycle marketing, right? Because your investors are going to want to invest again, or you're going to want them to invest again. Your potential investors are going to want to invest for the first time. And so I don't think enough founders treat it like that. I think founders treat it like a duty, like a reporting duty, like an SEC report.
As opposed to a marketing investment almost.
As opposed to a marketing investment. It's really a marketing investment. And the companies that do it well benefit, and the companies that don't, sometimes they do well, sometimes they don't. But better to have it, not need it, than need it, not have it.
Right on. And on that, let's end it with a Go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Good to see you, Kirby.
Good to see you, man.